She was hooded.
I'll call this meeting to order. Thank everyone for being here. And we have it seems like a lengthy agenda, but it's going to be fast. And there's Mr. Churchwell. Y'all, I want to start today with to read you an email that I received, because I think it's just so important for us to kind of get our head around why we're actually here. And it's from a student. It says, "Hello, my name is Tamara Waters, and I'm a 9th grader at Onslow Early College, High School. I wanted to propose an idea for a possible initiative that could impact the youth of Onslow County. In a study," and she cites the study that she read, "it was estimated that 20 to 50% of students enter college as undecided, and estimated 75% of the students change their major at least once before graduation. I propose to have a program in Jacksonville in the education system to team up with local businesses and try to get more internship opportunities and ways or students to explore different careers and fields. The goal of this program is to help the youth of Jacksonville find a career better suited to what they are interested in. In this idea, people in the start of the summer would start in the summer after freshman year. I believe that with your help, you and other school board members, you can leave a legacy for other counties to follow. Is this an initiative that seems plausible? Would you be willing to help start it? I hope that you can help get this program started for children who have the chance to become some of our leaders and educators and our future." I await your response. And I did respond and tell her that we had a meeting today, and I would share this with her, and did let her know that we do have similar opportunities through vocational ed, but I think hers is broader to let other students do that as well. So I throw that out to you because it's nice that students are thinking about things, and they must have researched this in the early college. So I thought that was good. Sorry that I took that privilege to read that to you, but I think it was worthy. First item of business is the policy revision. So, Counselor, you may begin and start on number A, letter A.
All right.
Okay.
Excuse me.
I think you're going to turn that over to me, or?
Madam Chair, it's a great pleasure I turn this matter over to Dr. Collins to present to the board.
Wow.
I'm glad you got to speak early on today.
That's a great intro. I appreciate that. Madam Chair, we do have a few policies this morning that fall under my jurisdiction, I guess. These are all policy revisions and updates based on state and federal law, and we're just trying to get our policies aligned to those. So the first one is staff-student relations is 440-7310, and in this policy, if it pleases the board for action today, there's some added language there to include independent contractors and school safety officers, but it also excludes student employees. And I think this part of the policy revision is important because we've had situations where we've had students who were employed in Onslow County. If you can imagine a 18-year-old out there mowing grass for us, and he's got a 18-year-old girlfriend in high school, we wouldn't see any problem with that, but the way the policy was written before, that would have been unlawful. So we're glad that that piece is in there. Also, it revises the reporting of inappropriate conduct to the state superintendent, which we have been doing already, but the reporting aspect of it was not in our policy, and we wanted that to be placed in there just to align it with the state law. So we present this, staff recommends that it be approved, and if it pleases the board, we ask for that action.
We have a motion to approve. Rock has a second. Any discussion, comments?
Just one quick question. You said that we've added the definition, but on the last page, 3 of 3, there is some strike through on 3 of 3 that is the inclusive language that is now on page 1. So did we add it, or we just moved it?
It was just moved.
All right, thank you.
Any other comments? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Madam Chair, likewise, we have policy 4100, age requirements for initial entry. These next three policies are directly related to foster care and how those children are treated within the district, within the state, to align it more closely with how homeless children are treated in the district. So the age requirements for initial entry, it added the language that states there should be no delay in enrollment for students in foster care if they lack the appropriate documents. And that aligns itself with the ESSA, and also it added the Elementary and Secondary Education Act in the legal references. So staff recommend that, I think it's on page 2 of that policy. You see the 5 words there in foster care or is, that was added. So we ask that that be added to the policy, and if it pleases the board, action on this policy.
We have a motion?
Make a motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
I have a question, Barry. Does this, I know foster care is a broad term because we have people who are allowing therapeutic foster care across counties. Does this apply to them as well?
It applies to foster care in our county.
Okay.
That's a good point. We have had situations where foster care ended up in Duplin County or other counties. We view that as out of district,
Right.
and then they would have to seek the appropriate placement.
Just wanted to
We don't want to take on additional, not that these kids are burdens to us, but we can't,
Right.
do that, so.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Madam Chair, likewise, 4110, immunization and health requirements for school admission. If you go to page 3, the last page, under item C, there was item D was added under foster children, and it reads, notwithstanding the provision of this policy, admissions for students in foster care will not be prohibited or delayed due to students' inability to provide documentation. So again, we're treating these children much like we do homeless in this situation, which aligns itself to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act down in the legal reference. So it's the staff recommendation that this be added to the policy if it pleases the board.
Motion's approved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Question on this one? Anybody?
Clarification, starting at the bottom of page 1, principals required to refuse admittance to any child. It's not a medical certification, but if a parent is unable to get an appointment with a doctor, if they can show that they have an appointment scheduled, does that?
We a little bit lenient on that one, as long as we're in contact with the parent and we know what's going on. Typically, we're able to get it within 30 days, but there has been situations where we've extended that time. But it's because of some, one-on-one with the parent, making sure that they're, and we also provide them information about how they can do that through the clinics and that sort of thing.
The reason I asked that on Friday, this was one of the issues that was brought up with the panel regarding the military transition. So things just don't work like that. But that particular scenario was brought up by one of the parents, so just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Well, actually, early, when we went to My Future in North Carolina, one of our principals on the panel brought it up about not being able to allow the kid to stay in school because of the health department didn't have enough. They just had a lot of people coming in for physicals.
Oh, so it got backed up.
It got backed up, but she had the appointment, the parent had the
Well, as
appointment.
long as they show the appointment,
Yeah, and it says in here additional days must be allowed
okay.
in order to
Well-
do that, so,
Just wanted to-
there's some flexibility within the policy, but for, it's like anything else, you gotta set a deadline, because if you don't,
Right.
it'll go forever, so you have to set a deadline and then you follow up.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
And the last one, and likewise, 4150, school assignment, we've added some language there that would allow foster child to remain at the school of origin unless it is in the best interest not to do so. And that language is also required in the ESSA, and it also added the Elementary and Secondary Education Act to the legal reference. So if you look on 4150, I think it's on page 2. Yeah, page 2, down at the bottom, close to the bottom, right above G, students who are assigned to foster care between academic years or during an academic year will remain in the school of origin unless remaining in the school of origin is not in the best interest of the student. The best interest of the student will be decided based on the relevant factors, including consideration and appropriateness of educational setting and proximity to the school in which the child is enrolled at the time of placement. So that language is very similar to the homeless language. It just gives us an opportunity to, if you have a situation and the child is placed in foster care and we're in the middle of the school year, we don't want to disrupt the child by moving them to another school. So they're allowed to stay in the school of origin, at least through the academic year. So Madam Chair, staff would recommend approval of 4150, school assignment as has been presented, if it pleases the board.
Motion to approve, anyone? Any questions,
I have a
comments?
quick question, Mr. Collins. If a child is moved during the school year, who would be required for transportation?
Well, that's a good question, and the answer to that, well, it's multi-level depending on the classification of the student. For instance, if they're classified as exceptional needs or not. We try to work with these folks. If a child is moved and they're not accepted, we would provide it if they're exceptional needs student right off the bat. But if they're not, we would work with the child to, I know one situation where the parent had to get them to a hub site, and then from the hub site, they could get to the school. So we try to work with them and provide it.
Well, we got to work with children,
Yeah.
can't leave them out there.
But in most cases, it's been, the parent providing the transportation.
Any other questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The next is budgeting, and Scrooge over here is speaking today.
Well, thank you for the compliment. I'll wear that as a badge of honor. During the budget process this year, there were questions about the numbers of positions that were in the local budget. And so in your packet, you have a document like this that provides the budgeted positions for the local current expense fund. And so that shows a number of positions there. See these broken down into various categories such as teachers, teacher assistants, office support, so forth. And these positions are laid out here, but in addition to what we have here, most of which are these school-based positions, there are also, of course, school-based positions in other funds as well that are allotted centrally through the Human Resources Office to the schools. And we thought that would probably be even more insightful for you to see how each school receives their positional allotments. And so Dr. Collins has a couple of documents and was going to walk you through how that process works.
We had actually two worksheets here, and I'm gonna bounce back and forth between them, but if we'll start with this one, the one that's color-coded at the top. And then you also have, the second one, says example elementary school, and that's gonna give us an example of how we allot teachers. So, let's go back to this, color-coded worksheet. It says 2018-19 allotment worksheet, that sheet at the top. You'll notice in the left column, we have the schools broken out by elementary, middle, and high school on the left side. The second column, and this is real important for us to understand, is that these numbers, the projected enrollment, is a guess. It is a projected number. It will fluctuate, it will vary from day to day, but this is the number that we received from ORED, and it's based on second month ADM of this year with the growth factors involved. So the next column beside the projected enrollment is the current number of teachers that are presently at the school that are considered just the regular ed teachers, the teachers that are assigned students. And then beside that, you'll see the projected number. The projected number is what I want to kind of focus on today based on our conversation of what it is we're looking at to define, how some of these things are done. So if you will now shift over to the sheet that says example elementary school. This is just a real quick, easy way of looking at how the teachers are allotted. First of all, this is an elementary school. It has a nice, neat package of 600 kids, and you'll notice that in each grade level, there are 100 students in each grade level. Wow. I mean, wouldn't that be nice, if kids came in little packages of 100, which we know that they do not, but just for the example, it made it easier for us to look at. So basically, the ratios this year in that third column are 20 and then 24 at fourth and fifth grade. Now, I want to stop right there and say this because I think this is important. Next year, those numbers will change to 19 in K3, 24 and 4-5, and then the following year, it will be 18, 16, 17, 24, 24. And that's the year that we must maintain those numbers, and you cannot exceed that number, okay? And that's going to be important for a lot of reasons, especially for Mr. Myers when we're looking at classroom space and those kinds of things. So you'll see, you take the ratio, divide it into the number of students, that gives you an allotted number of teachers for that grade level. So basically 100 divided by 20 is 5. So you get that number in that last column. You get down to fourth and fifth grade, you'll see it's 4.16, 4.16, and then you add those up, it's 28.32. Now, right now, we're rounding, and we use conventional rounding. So it's 28.32, so that rounds to 28. Now, what's significant about that, and the reason I told you the other piece is that in year 3, we won't be able to do that kind of rounding. For K3, we'll have to round up always. So if you end up with 20.1, then what does that mean?
Another teacher.
That means another teacher. You have to go up to 21. You won't be able to use conventional rounding in that scenario for K3 in year 3. Down at the bottom, you'll see that we rounded 28, and then we had the enhancement teachers, the 3 enhancement teachers for elementaries, art, P, and music. So you add that to the number, and that gets you 31. So then you take that number, 31, and you put it in this spreadsheet under projected number of teachers. So you do that for all the schools and all the different ratios, and you come up with a projected number. The next column is the one that we look at to go, okay, We know that this is not a perfect student number, so we have to stay within a range. You can't go into this thing trying to get it exactly on the number, because you know that the number that you're working with is going up and down over here, so you can't get it perfect each time. So what we do is we try to stay within a +2 and a -2. And as long as we're within a +2, -2, we feel that we're okay. And then we have in the next column is the actual gains and losses. Now that's where we have conversations. Again, this is an ongoing process, so that column is going to change probably on a weekly basis between now and the time school starts, because we're having conversations. I've already had the first round. Every single principal that I've talked with, we sat down, we went through these numbers. Here's your projected number, here's the current number of teachers, here's what is projected for that number, and what do we need to do to make this work. And sometimes it comes down to conversations like, for example, at a middle school, you have teachers that, it could be a licensure issue, for example. They need a math teacher and a science teacher. Well, if they find a teacher that is licensed in both areas, then they don't need two, they just need one. Do you see what I'm saying? So sometimes these numbers are not going to be exact because of the situations at each school. But for right now, you'll see that what we're trying to do under those actual and gains losses is get it to a point where we're within the plus and -2 on teachers. So it starts out as a pretty simple concept. You take a number, you divide, you add, you round, and here's the number. But then it becomes complicated when you start breaking it down into individual schools and what is needed. So that's where that column is, the actual gains and losses. Sort of the same scenario if you go over to TAs. We use a formula for that in elementary school. We look at the K1 numbers. We add those up for all the students. How many students do you have in K1? And you divide by 25, and that gives you the number of TAs for the elementary schools. We have, in the middle and high schools, we have either 2 or 3 TAs depending on the sizes of the school and the situation at the school. But basically, we have, we try to maintain 2 or 3 TAs at middle schools and high schools. Assistant principals, that's a good column to look at because it kind of gives you a better idea of what numbers do to position allotment. So look at the first under assistant principals in the top, just the elementary schools. You'll notice that every elementary school has 1 AP, except for one school. Does everybody see that? Mm-hmm. Dixon Elementary School. Now, why do you think Dixon Elementary School has 2? They have over 1,000 students. So once that elementary number hits 1,000, then we look at adding another AP at that school. Similar situation in the middle schools and the high schools. Notice that all the high schools, except for the early college, obviously, have 2 APs. The middle schools is a little bit different, and we're probably looking at, and here's where adjustments come. We haven't made this adjustment, but probably at Dixon Middle School, we'll be adding a second AP because there are over 800 students at that school. We didn't do that last year because we had some interns last year that helped out with the principal at that school filling that position. But this coming year, we're probably looking at another AP there. Guidance counselors, the same way. If you look at the top, you see 2 at Dixon Elementary School. The rest of them have 1. You see media. Testing coordinators, there are none at the elementary and middle, but there's 1 at each of our high schools down at the bottom. DLTs, that is the digital learning teachers or facilitators, and you'll see that it's roughly 0.5 at each school. That just means that they're split, okay? There's 20.5 DLTs that are in our schools, they're all split. You know, they have, most of them are split. I think there are a couple of schools that the DLT stays at that school site. Instructional coaches, there are 8.5, and the way that I have them listed there is by home base. And under this category, I know that most of these 0.5s are retirees, so that means they can only work half-time anyway. So for example, Blue Creek is 0.5, that's probably a retiree and that's their only school site. But some of them are split, even the ones that have one, like Jacksonville Commons Elementary and Meadowview. It says that they have one, but they're probably split between there and another school. School nurses, back, gosh, Pam, I don't know, it was 20 years ago, we decided as a board to have a school nurse at each of our elementary schools, and that still exists. We do have 2 SNFI nurses that are paid through a different funding source, and one of those is at the middle school level and is shared at the middle school. Social workers, we have 12 of those, and you can see that we basically split their time. They're in charge of 3 different schools, so their time is split equally. Probably most of their time is spent at the elementary school, but they're also having to work with middle schools and high schools as well. Data managers, there's one at every school. Treasurers, there's one at every school. Receptionists, there's one at every school. IT, that's the technicians. Their time is split about 2/3 of their time at each individual schools. We have 24 of those, and it just depends on a day-to-day basis. For example, when we had the virus threat, we would take all of our technicians and go to one school or go to another school, or we'd split them up. So theirs is more based on what's happening at the school level, but the way that their time is split in payroll and in HRMS is 2/3. So, and then we have a list of custodians, the number of custodians. The way that that's determined is by, well, it's 2 factors. One is the student ADM number, but the second factor is the square footage of the school, and in some cases, it's also factored in the type of school. Where you have some schools that are older and have a lot of outside units, that's taken into consideration, and versus a new school like a Meadowview or Northside High School, where the school is pretty much self-contained and everything is a little bit easier access to stuff. It may not take quite as much on those, but all those things are factored in, and CJ and Daniel Gray sat down and they go through all that with Dusty Oliver, and they determine how many custodians are needed at each site, and those numbers are in there as well. So what I've tried to do is take something that's very large and condense it down into one sheet for you so that you can kind of get an idea of how some of these formulas work and how we adjust. And I think the main thing here is that this is a living document. This is not something that these numbers are going to stay the same. They're going to vary from, time to time, depending on the number of students that we have at the school. So, all right, Madam Chair, that's just a brief.
Any questions for Jeff or Barry?
Question.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Collins, looking at the assistant principal column and the projected enrollment, and looking at some of the enrollment figures that are closely approaching 1,000,
Yes.
do we foresee increasing or having to increase assistant principal at those sites with the projected enrollment creeping up to 1,000?
We do. For instance, one that we're watching is Carolina Forest Elementary School. They're at 908. So the way that we have it set up now, if they jump over 1,000 students, then there will be consideration for them as well.
another question along those lines, the person that, or the, and I don't know if we can discuss it here, but the person that perhaps has the licensure where they can feel, say for instance, the person that can teach math and teach science, and they're counted as one of the teachers in the allocation, would that prohibit them from being considered as an assistant principal? Because you're gonna lose that person's ability to teach in the classroom?
Right. That's a good question. We're going through that right now. We don't have a lot of AP vacancies this year, but anytime that, you know, during the summer when we put the vacancies out there, a lot of the APs that we hire are our own teachers. Yes, and that does create a vacancy. It makes us sad in a way because we're pulling a teacher out of the classroom, but at the same time, we don't want to prohibit or hinder them from advancing. Yeah. But it does make it a little tougher, and we try to do that early in the summer. Try not to do that a lot during the school year because we don't want to pull people out during the school year.
Quick question with regards to state allotments, and I went on the state website, I could not find anything to do with the 2019 state allotments for state-funded positions or whatever, so I'm assuming that that will come in the near future on that, but how does those numbers at the state allotments correlate to the numbers that we have here? I'm assuming the state numbers I've got for 2018 are considerably higher allotted numbers than what we currently have, and I think that's because they're funding us for the smaller class sizes, but we have waivers through the next 3 years until we catch up with that. Is that correct?
I think that's part. Well, go ahead.
I think that as part of the issue here, when you look at teacher allotments, what Barry's showing here are kind of the regular teachers, because he does the allotment based on kind of the general standard for all the schools. In addition to that, we also have exceptional children's teachers. And as you know, the state caps our funding at 12.75% of our ADM. Our student numbers generally run quite higher than that, so we are underfunded usually by millions of dollars each year for the exceptional children's program. So we also have to use state funding to help support the EC program beyond the direct EC funds that they get. So there are positions that are allocated to the exceptional children's program.
Do you know what that percentage of EC teachers are currently, or the EC students rather, what, as compared, you said it's capped at 12.75?
It had been 12.5. This year they actually increased it for the first time that I'm aware of to 12.75, which helped a little bit. A lot of times we'll run around 14.5% or so.
Okay.
And,
Now, the numbers that we're looking at, the chart that the chart that Barry presented, that doesn't include the EC teachers?
It does not. It does not, because you have to separate that out from the regular ed teacher positions. Also in here, we don't have CTE. CTE is a separate set of funding and teachers for those as well. Title I is not in there.
those programs, work with the schools on those allocations because they're specialized, for that. It's going to depend, the VC is going to vary depending on the population that's at which school, how many one-to-one settings they have, how many, there's all sorts of different scenarios that the EC program has to manage. The CTE is dependent upon what programs they have in each school and how they allocate that out. The Title I programs, the schools get with the Title I director and decide, we want to use our money towards extra teachers to help reduce class size, or to have additional literacy support, or towards supplies or whatever. So that varies from school to school. What Barry was trying to show here was the kind of the regular type of allotments that go out to schools generally, rather than getting into those specific programs that have so many different variables.
Are these just state-funded positions then, or are these state and local current expense, or local current expense and federal?
These are state and local.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mr. Collins, you gave the number 1,000 for assistant principals at elementary, 800 at middle. What is high school?
They get to.
Was on-
This
on
all
that.
that.
At high school level, they have so many
Different
extracurricular
programs,
activities,
after-school
evenings
stuff
and all
going on.
that.
A lot.
Even
Do
a
do
small
those
high school
numbers
is
correlate
like
to allotment?
Those-
Or are they our numbers?
Well, first of all, we don't get paid enough money, you know, for our assistant principal allotment does not cover, but what, about half?
About half,
Yeah.
yeah.
For the
That's a
state.
good example there. The board years ago, decided that it was important to have, coverage on every campus. So there's at least one assistant principal on every campus, because there's gonna be times when the principal's off campus and for safety and security and all that, you need to have that. And so to provide at least one at each site, there's not even enough, state funding to cover that.
So we don't get enough for 37 APs?
No.
No, I think it's about 24.
And so that's where the local budget kind of comes in. It kind of helps offset areas that are underfunded by the state.
Plug some
Yes,
holes.
to plug some holes.
And the APs are funded 1 per 89 point per month or something like that. Are they on 10-month salaries?
It depends.
Some of them are, some of them aren't.
Yeah, elementary schools are 10 months. Middle schools, I think there's 110 and
112 for the larger ones.
Yeah, and the high schools,
110
are
and
110 and
112.
112.
That's kind of a confusing term to me. I'm not sure what it means. When you say 1 to 89 per month or per academic month, whatever, what does that actually mean? How does that work out with regards to our total student population?
But, and I think, I'm not sure, but I think it's like 98.1 or whatever. They take the number of students times that ratio, and then that's how many months of employment that they provide. But they're only providing the assistant principals on a 10-month basis.
Right.
So they don't provide that 11th and 12th month that we need out there. So that's another reason why we have to have local funding to help, fund those positions as well.
Okay, thank you.
Your special needs, what fund does that come from?
Well, special needs come from a whole bunch of different funds. They've got lots of state, lots of federal. There are certain specialized PRCs that are so specific that money can only be spent on a specific child. And if that child leaves the district, you have to send that money back to the state. It can't be spent on any other purpose. The EC program is probably one of the most complex funding areas. And so they use combinations of state, local, and federal funding. There's so many things that they have to keep all aligned. It is quite complex.
Your guidance counselors, how are they allotted, high school wise?
Let's see, guidance counselors at the high schools, it's 2 at each high school except for White Oak and Jacksonville. And I think at the time, we were looking at the number in terms of, you hit a number and you get an extra guidance counselor. But I know at, for example, White Oak, they've got 3 guidance counselors, but they only have 1 media. So there was a switch off there. They had 2 media. They went to 1 and they said, you know what, I'd rather just stick with 1 media and just give me another guidance counselor. So it was an even swap for those 2 positions.
But I say that, having been a high school principal, I want you to understand, 2 is not enough. All that's going on today, and they keep talking about this and that and this and that. Our guidance counselors used to have time to call students in and counsel them one-on-one and testing and everything else on their plate today, and they're looking for solutions, that's one of the solutions. We need more guidance counselors because they can spot these people as they meet with them, talk with them, and hear about them. That's a crucial area.
Follow up on that regarding testing coordinators. I recall a time when we didn't have testing coordinators, and guidance counselors said you need to change our name, our title, because we don't provide guidance anymore. We're in the testing mode constantly. But as I look at the elementary and middle schools that do not have testing coordinators, all that testing relies on that one guidance counselor.
Or AP.
Or AP, which takes time away from them. The school nurses, basically, they're none at the high school, one at the middle school, and all at the elementary, but if I'm not mistaken, those nurses at the elementary school actually go to
the high school.
To a high school. So their duties are.
There's specific days that they, for example, there's, in sixth grade, there is an immunization requirement for sixth graders. And I know our elementary nurses go to the middle schools, and for a few days, they're assigned at those middle schools to take care of those immunizations. And of course, anytime that there's an emergency, our school nurses, this is where they're home based, is at the elementary schools, but they get phone calls all the time from the middle school or the high school, hey, can you come over here and check this out? So they're kind of on call all the time for the middle and high school, but their home base is at the elementary school.
And they've always been willing and good about coming to the school.
Absolutely.
And Dr. Collins, my comment was not about you. I know you
No, sir.
can only deal with what you got. I'm just saying in general, that's something people in Raleigh need to listen to.
Yes, sir, and I think, with all the safety and security issues that are coming up, part of that has to do with mental health and counseling and that sort of thing. And so having an additional guidance counselor, as well as the law enforcement, both of those pieces would be something that needs to be considered, so.
Jeff, I have one question. It might be the last one from, as we move forward. The data managers are paid locally, correct? And I know, just for historical purposes, the data managers at the high schools were the first group to become 12-month employees and data managers. Then we went to the middle, and then we went to the elementary. Those positions have remained stationary across the last 5 years, I believe. We've not increased any more data managers, so.
But yet their responsibility has.
Yes, gone up a lot. Any other questions or comments?
I just have one real quick. The early college, you got there's a lot of zeros there, or a lot of that supplanted by community college staff is.
Well, the need, because we're only looking at 100 students, well, it was actually 50 there this year. It was only 50 there this year, so this is projected for next year. But yeah, it's just based on need. And if that, I think in the third year or fourth year, it's supposed to go up to 200, 150, and then 200. And then we'll look at, do we need to add, some additional. But I do believe that you are correct in thinking that, I think in year 3 and 4, a lot of those students would be assigned to Coastal Carolina. Yeah.
They'll be taking the college classes with the college instructors in the junior and senior years. So the part that's staying over kind of on our side, if you will really be the freshman, sophomore year. So we look about 100 students that will be addressing directly, with the other 100 in the upper grades being more covered through the school in terms of the actual classes. Of course, the principal and the guidance person and all that would be working with all.
So, like for guidance, we've got a half, so that's split from another school.
Well, actually, that was not. That one was a actual part-time.
Position. Okay.
And they've only got 50 students there.
On the other hand, just to point out, because I know when we leave here, some of you are going to have to think about this, There's no reflection in this of our Career Launch Center, our Regional Skills Center, but that will be vocationally ed funded, I assume.
CTE.
Any other questions? Good report. You got a question, Earl? Comment? Earl?
Thank you for all the extra time you and Mr. Alton put into this, and I think you've been doing this how long? Well, our system,
11 years.
11 years, I think you in Jones County.
Two years in Jones
And
County.
last question, did students arrive in Jones County in a nice package?
No, sir, they did not. Actually, it was smaller packages, but yeah.
You still had to.
Still had to do the same thing, yeah.
And Barry, I think you're gonna do the next presentation
I am.
on calendar flexibility. You know that
Actually, yep.
there have been some talk about, some systems we're given the flexibility to change our schedule or whatever so that we could have exams before Christmas. And we've already voted for 2 years of calendars through 20. But I asked Barry if he would do this. I think that we need to go ahead and plant the seed in our heads about what we may be looking at and how it might affect us.
Madam Chair, I think I've done a good job of delegating this responsibility today. We've been talking about this issue for a long time, the calendar flexibility, and we all know at this table that the flexibility really needs to be in the begin and end date, and getting those dates spread out a little bit. A couple of weeks would help tremendously to get us to a point where at the end of the first semester, you know, by December 20th, we're done with first semester. There is some movement, I think, and I'll share that with you a little bit later. But Brent Anderson is our expert on calendar. He's been doing it for a couple of years. And Brent, you want to come on up? One of the things that we looked at was Cumberland County, because Cumberland County has recently, I think, was it this year or next year they're doing?
They're going this year.
This coming school year, looking at some alternatives. We looked at it. We think there's some pros and there's some definite cons to what Cumberland is doing. So Brent's going to kind of lay this out. This is not for action today. It's just for consideration. And I would say not even for next year. If we did anything at all, it would need to be at least 2 years out. But at the end of your presentation, I do want to make one other comment about it. So, go ahead.
Dr. Collins, Madam Chair, members of the board, executive staff. I've had the privilege of working, I guess it's a privilege, working with development of the school calendar for a number of years in this role with community affairs, working with the student services when I was there, and as a principal, I'd served on the committee to help develop our school calendar a number of times, and it's always an interesting thing. What I always tell people when we talk about developing the school calendar, if you remember those little tile puzzles that you used to get that had one piece missing, and you had to slide all the tiles around to make the picture appear, the school calendar is a lot like that. The box is kind of set by legislation, and then you've got to slide the tiles around to make the picture look like you want it to look. And it's not a lot of flexibility compared to what we used to have. Just wanted to start off by taking a look at just review the legislation, so where this is the box that we work within. So we've got I'm just going to kind of hit some of the high points of this. This first bullet especially, the start date no earlier than the Monday closest to August 26th, and an end date no later than the Friday closest to June 11th, unless a weather-related calendar waiver has been approved. Year-round schools, charter schools, cooperative innovative high schools like our early college do not fall under this legislation. So we're talking here just about our traditional schools in Onslow County. So Northwoods Elementary, Clyde Irwin, Onslow Early College are not affected by this legislation.
Say that one more time. Charter schools are not.
Charter schools do not have to follow this legislation either. So they've got calendar flexibility to do whatever they want to do. With our year-round schools, we develop a calendar that works for that. With our cooperative innovative high school, with the early college, we do the same thing. A key number to remember as we go through this is the number 215, because that is the total number of days that we have to have in the school calendar, because that is the total number of days that our teachers work in a school year. So all the numbers, when you add everything up, Has to be 215 from the first workday to the last workday for our teachers. No educational waivers for purposes here. Must be closed all day for that. Must cover at least 9 calendar months. And the last bullet on this one is an important one. Must have a minimum of 185 days or 1,025 hours of instruction. I emphasize the or between the days and the hours. We've got flexibility to work within that difference. So when we start to look at these examples, you notice there's less than 185 days. We have less than 185 days right now in our current calendar. We go with a 180-day school year. But we have over 1,025 instructional hours. So we'll take a look at what that is and the difference between the two that we have there. Some other things to consider about the calendar. Must have at least 9 teacher work days. The board can designate what days they may take leave. We must have a minimum of 10 annual vacation leave days, have the same number of legal holidays that occur within the calendar as those designated by the State Personnel Committee, and we have that all built into the calendar. Schools shall not be held on Sunday, as if we needed to be told that. And the interesting one there, that last bullet, this is one we always point out when we talk to groups about developing the calendar, is that Veterans Day shall be a holiday for all public schools. It has to fall on Veterans Day. So if it's on a Wednesday, we're going to be off on Wednesday, if that's November 11th. If it falls on a weekend, we go either the Friday before or the Monday after. And that's determined by the state, what day the state takes off for that one.
In fact, the only required holiday, I mean, Thanksgiving is not required, Christmas, New Year's Day, the only required holiday.
That is the only required holiday by legislation. Now, there's others that we're obviously not going to have school on Thanksgiving or on Christmas, but this one is specifically spelled out in the legislation of what we have to look at there. So if you look at the attachments that you've got a table that has the Onslow County traditional calendar, and we're going to kind of take a look at these, and this is what our 1819 traditional calendar looks like right now. If you flip over a couple of other pages, there is a handout that looks kind of like this, that says at the top, Onslow County Schools 2018-19 school year calendar. This is our traditional school calendar for next year. I took out the E's and the W's and I've just kind of left the colors, and I'll explain the color code, what that looks like. But basically the chart on the slide up there spells out what we've got. We have 11 holidays, and if you're looking at the colored calendar, this one right here, the red days are our holidays. So there are 11 red days on the calendar. The blue days that you see on the calendar are teacher work days, and we currently have 14 teacher work days built into the calendar. The green days are our annual leave days, so those are built in as well. And then we have 90 days, student days in the first semester, 90 days in the second semester, for a total of 215 days. So we add all those up, holidays, work days, leave days, student days, gives us 215. So you see with 90 and 90, we've got a 180-day school year for the kids. So that's basically the number of days that the kids are in school. The first and ending days of the first semester, first and ending days of the second semester. It meets all of our statutory requirements. We have 215 total days. It allows us an additional 40 hours of cushion for inclement weather or days that we miss school. So when we miss a day of school and we don't have to make it up because we have the hours, we're able to absorb those with the hours that we have above the 1,025 required instructional hours. So I think this calendar has, when you add the number of days, we do roughly 6 hours a day times 180 days gives us, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,045.
1,080.
1,080, that's
And then
right.
15 hours for, you know.
That's right. We have to take out the 15 hours for early release days. So we have our 5 early release days. So that's 3 hours for each of those. That's a 15-hour deduction. And that gives us the number that we have. With this, yes, Ms. Thompson.
I know you said the green days, or I know they're leave days. You said annual leave days.
Mm-hmm.
Well, annual leave is accrued by the employee, so is that taking their time?
Well,
Or is that,
and
It's built in, yeah, it's built into the calendar. There are 10 days that are built in that you have to deduct annual leave for, and those are already built in. So this gets to the point of who can take leave. And if you've got a teacher that is first, second year teacher,
I think the third year, they actually start accruing leave.
That's why I wanted to ask that
Right.
question. Most people
The
may
first
not
2
know that.
years, they don't really, they're only accruing enough leave to take these days off, basically. Yeah.
And what we try to do with those leave days is we try to build them into the calendar around the holidays. So we built the first one in there right before, it's the Wednesday before Thanksgiving in November. We build them around Christmas, so we have that time off, everybody gets the holidays off, and then their leave days built around that. And we build those in spring break in April around the Easter holiday. So we have that break in the middle of the semester. One thing I will point out, if you look at the beginning and ending dates, those are the yellow dates that are marked on the color calendar. First semester next year will start on August 27th. That is the earliest that we can start with the legislation. First semester ends on January 18th. And there are 4 E's on January 15, 16, 17, and 18. Those are our high school exams. Second semester begins on January 24th, and we have those 2 teacher work days prior to that, so our high schools can reset and be ready for the second semester, change schedules, make adjustments that they need to make, anything like that as they go through, and be ready for second semester, and the school year ends next year on June 11th. And again, exams on the last 4 days of school. So if you take a look back at December and January, right in the middle of the calendar, school gets out for Christmas break on December 20th, and the kids are out for not quite a full 2 weeks. I think we're 1 day shy of a full 2 weeks with our calendar next year. And then they'll come back for roughly 8 days and then take exams. One of the concerns that has come up among a lot of school districts is the impact that this has on our high school kids. To be out for almost 2 weeks, come back, try to have to play catch up, and then take exams. When it would be a lot more beneficial to take exams prior to Christmas. They don't have to worry about it over the break. They're fresh. They can push right up to the exams before Christmas. Be done. Staff has time then, 2 weeks of time during the Christmas break to get everything ready, and they can be prepared when they come back in January and move forward. If you've had any children in college, you know that's traditionally how the colleges work. Have exams before Christmas, start second semester after Christmas. Coastal has exams before Christmas. They start second semester after Christmas. It aligns nicely with what we have there. So right now, this calendar, based on the legislation and how we're working things, doesn't allow any flexibility to be able to have exams prior to Christmas break, using the number of hours that we use for the day. So this is our traditional 10-month calendar for Onslow County Schools. Now the next calendar, or the next information we'll take a look at, and keep this one handy because it's good to sit this one right next to the one we're going to look at. And I did this for a reason. We're going to take a look at the Cumberland County 2018-19 traditional school calendar, what they're doing next year. What Cumberland County and there are a number of other districts. Sampson County is doing this next year. Robeson County is taking a look at it for the 2019-2020 school year. Jones County is looking at it. Brunswick County, Cumberland. There's a number of school systems that are looking at what can we do within the existing frame to be able to offer exams prior to Christmas break. And what the school systems have come up with is adding time to the school day. Remember that 1,025 hours of instruction. Looking at how we can make that longer by adding time to the day, and then we can kind of modify what we have within the existing framework. The frame doesn't change. We're still starting here and ending here, but we're just kind of making it look different inside that, adjusting the tiles, if you will. So on the traditional calendar for Cumberland County next year, what they have done is they've still got the 11 holidays. So if you find the Cumberland County calendar, that looks like this. It says Cumberland County Schools. So I put it in the same format as ours. So you're looking kind of an easy comparison of the two calendars side by side. On the Cumberland County calendar, we've got 11 holidays. I will point out that they have bumped up to 25 teacher work days. They have 10 annual leave days. They have 79 days in the first semester and 90 days in the second semester. So they have a 169-day school year for the students. Now to offset that, what they've done is they've added approximately 15 minutes to each school day. I think it's probably closer to 20 that they're looking at doing, but approximately 15, doing some flexibility as they go through there. And that allows them the time to give exams before Christmas break. So if you look at the Cumberland County calendar, In December, you've got exams on the 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st of December. Their first semester next year will end on December 21st. Now that's late, because it's right before Christmas, but it does then give them a full 2 weeks for the students off. They're off that week of Christmas, the last week of December, first week of January, and they come back on January 7th ready to go for the second semester, and then they have a 90-day student day semester for semester 2, and they actually will end their semester next year, end their school year next year, on May 24th, which is the Friday before Memorial Day. Now, one of the things that happens here when you do this is you shorten the time of day, the number of days that the students are in there, but we increase the hours. One thing that happens here is that there's no flexibility for the inclement weather. When you use the multiplier with 6.065 is what we use to look at the numbers for the year, that gives it a flat 1,025 instructional hours, which is the minimum number the state says that they can have. So if Cumberland County runs into any kind of weather situations or anything like that, they're going to be looking at probably having to either extend the school year or be making up days on Saturdays. So I've been in contact with Ron Phipps, who's the Testing and Accountability Associate Superintendent in Cumberland County. Our schedules have not been able to get connected, but he did send me an email last week, asked me to get up with him and he could share some more details specifically of what they've done. So when I get that information, I'll share it with Jody and make sure that Ms. Thomas has all that and can get that out to the board and executive staff to take a look at. But what happens here also is we've got 11 fewer student days. One of the big concerns that Dr. Collins and I had when we were taking a look at what we could do with this flexibility is that we have staff in Onslow County that only work on student days. Our bus drivers and cafeteria staff mainly are the two groups that are affected by this. If we have 11 fewer student days, that's 11 fewer days for our cafeteria and bus drivers to work. So that was a big concern. How are we going to deal with this and what are we going to do with these employees? Mr. Phipps has shared some basic information with me, and what they have done in Cumberland County is that they are building in some prep time for bus drivers and cafeteria staff, that they will pay them some extra time to come in and get things ready for school prior to the year starting, wrapping things up at the end of the year, paying for some training, and just adding some time to offset the amount that they're working or not working because of the change to the calendar. Same thing with the custodian or with the bus drivers, giving them some extra time to get things prepped each day before they get their starting routes. At the end of the day, before the routes are over, or when their routes are over, giving some extra time, doing some extra training, and paying those people accordingly to build that up. It does bump up the number of teacher work days, and that will be one, obviously, working with instructional services to see what can we do to provide PV for teachers during that. We're not going to have as many opportunities during the school year because we will be a lot tighter, but what can we do to take a look at how are you going to address that with the number of work days?
Brent,
Yes, sir.
what was their reasoning for so many teacher work days?
Well, again, 215. So they've got to have 215 work days. So,
Teachers have to work that many days.
yes, sir. So the teachers have to work that many days. So they've got to, that number still has to be 215 when it adds up at the bottom. So if you take 79, 90, 11, and 10, that means we got to have 25 work days that we're going to put into that. Now, they could have, maybe could flip those over and make them annual leave days. I don't know.
Could they not make them instructional days?
So, well, again, try to make that exam happen before Christmas. So that would be the key.
As a high school principal, I'm looking at the 10 teacher work days before we start school.
Yes, sir.
That's my question. Why couldn't 5 of those be instructional days?
Because the legislation says we can't start school any sooner than the 27th.
We're still bound to that.
We're still bound to that, yes, sir. So that's the beginning date.
I understand that.
Yep. So what these counties have done basically is they've said, okay, if we can't start any earlier than here and have to be in here, what can we do within those 2 dates to be able to make some adjustments? And adding hours or adding minutes to the days to get the instructional hours is the solution that a lot of districts have come up with. Now, I've given you another handout in there that kind of spells out what the Cumberland County looks like, how that goes through. But I want to take a look now at what would this look like for Onslow County in the 2019-2020 school year. And to do this, rather than a whole bunch of different drafts, we just kind of took the Cumberland County model and applied it for Onslow County. And what does that look like for us? So this is draft, really big draft here, and this is the one that says 2019-2020 draft on it. That color copy, you can pull that one out and take a look at it. So on this one, we do have 11 holidays, and those again are the red days built into the calendar. We've got 25 teacher work days, and using the Cumberland model, we put them at the beginning and the end of the year, those extra days. We have 10 annual leave days, the green colored days, and then we have a 79 student day first semester and a 90 student day second semester for a total of 215 days. So that would mean in the 2019-2020 school year, our school year would start on August 26th, and the exams would be over on December 20th, the Friday before Christmas. And then we would come back on January 6th, and we would finish up on May 21st. Again, being finished before Memorial Day for the students. Now, obviously, the teachers are going to have to be in session with work days. But it kind of sets everything up there. So we're hitting all these markers again. We meet the statutory requirements. We've got 215 total days, so our teachers are working those days. Adds approximately 15, maybe a little more than 15 to 20 minutes per school day. Exams before break. It does not give us any flexibility. That's one of the issues that we run into here. That puts us right at about 1,025 instructional hours and 11 fewer student days in that first semester. Now, one of the things that I did or was able to do looking at this one, notice we have a 79-day first semester. There is a teacher workday built into that first semester in October. Cumberland being a little further inland doesn't have the concerns necessarily about hurricanes as much as we do right here on the coast. So having that workday in October gives us at least one workday that if something were to happen in that August-September timeframe, we would be able to use that as a makeup day without having to go to Saturdays. In the second semester, there are 2 work days built in, February 17th and March 16th. Again, if we have another January like we had this year, it gives us some flexibility to be able to make up days without having to go into our Saturdays or maybe even take annual leave days away from April and do some things, around there. One other thing that we looked at and considered with this calendar is if you notice on August 16th, that Friday, and on the end over there on June 5th, that Friday, have an X in them. We go to 4 10-hour days during the summer for central office and all school sites. Once the students are out for the year and the teachers are gone, we go to the 4 10s. There's a possibility we could look at making the 16th of August and the 5th of June no days for teachers, do 4 10s, and be off on those 2 Fridays as a possible way of not having them there as many days, still be 10 hours of a day, but an opportunity to not have a Friday for those particular days.
I have a question. I know that Cumberland County is doing this across the board, aren't they? For every school. It seems like to me it would be an ideal time to have a conversation, I mean, not today or anything, but to have a conversation about having a different calendar for the high schools. They're the only ones that are affected by exams.
That would be a good discussion.
Yeah, and I don't know what that would look like, but or what it would entail with transportation and those kind of things, but that's probably something to consider.
Madam Chair, with regards to the Cumberland County calendar and the draft 1920 calendar that you presented here, is it realistic to think that we're not going to have any days off due to inclement weather based on our previous history?
No,
No, sir.
no.
So why wouldn't it make sense then to extend the school year out maybe 2 or 3 days and put a couple work days, teacher work days in there in the second semester, because that's where we most likely are going to have to make it up at, as opposed to just having 2 work days in there and about 10 work days at the end of the year.
And that was one of the things I was just going to mention, Mr. Williams, is that this is a draft based on the Cumberland model. There are some other school systems that have taken this same idea and they have created an 80-day first semester and a 100-day second semester. Now, there's nothing to say that we couldn't continue school on into June and end about the same time we do now. It would give us two very different lengths of semester. You'd have an 80 and 100-day break, so you'd do something like that. But I know I was looking at one of the other school calendars, and they've done that. They've done an 80 and 100. You still have 180 student days, but it does have exams before Christmas in that model. So that could certainly be an option as well. As I said, I just took the Cumberland model, rather than giving a whole bunch of different drafts, just kind of used one model, so we're looking apples to apples to kind of get a feel for what it looks like compared to us. And with Cumberland being a relatively this same kind of size that we're looking at as well.
One of the concerns I have is the optics, looking at a month of teacher work days, 2 weeks before and 2 weeks after the students.
That's kind of where our traditional calendar is, though.
It does force us to stack them at the beginning and the end with the way we have to work on it now.
Yeah, I think this is a little heavier. The modified of the draft is heavily loaded though with that, whereas we traditionally, and I understand the days before school, that's preparation, that's needed. I think where we may get criticized though is all of the last week of May and the first week of June, after school is out, what are the teachers actually doing, unless we could heavily have that loaded with some training for them of some sort to prepare them for the following year.
And I think that would definitely take a lot of work in coordination with instructional services, work with Dr. Folder and her folks to make sure that there's something provided and we get that word out, and this is what we're doing. It gives us an opportunity to do, if we continue using the summer school model, that it can be done during that time while teachers are actually in session, rather than having to have people come back and do something like that. It may open up more possibility of being able to do that on a larger scale for our kids. Remediation, bring kids back that may be able to come back during that time and take advantage of instructional programming, just any number of kind of things there that we could do that would be beneficial. It may cut down also on the number of events that we would have to have maybe during the summer when teachers are really off, and it's hard to get them to come back sometimes if they may not be willing to come in July. But hey, if I'm already working and we do something and schedule it during those last 9 days of work days, I've gotten down there, I'm going to come, we could do more focused PD and more training for our teachers and staff during that time. So I think there's a lot of things to work out, and I think we're very wise to not jump into it for next year. Let's see what other districts are doing next year, and then look at it for 1920, because there's a lot of good questions to answer based on these different drafts.
In regards to the inclement weather, I think, was it 2 years ago, too fall, a couple of years ago, was it Matthews? A hurricane that came through that washed Cumberland, Washington County.
Yeah, it was.
So they were out a week or so, maybe longer. So although we get a lot of the inclement weather here,
They get the weather, they get the river flooding.
it ain't really a difference. I know in the past, the state would establish some pilot programs to check things out first. This is something Cumberland is doing on their own, probably out of frustration.
Yes, sir. This is not a pilot program from the state. So I think it's a way of some districts looking at what does the law say and how can we function within, these are the parameters we're given, what can we do within
So you
that.
can see what works and what, I know in Osceola County, like they've been here a long time, we've always worked, established pilot programs. Paul, I think you established the AB, you investigated the
Yes,
4x4 and so forth and other things, just to work out the kinks. It would be interesting to see what works and doesn't work here. And I think it was back during the early 90s, the state passed a law that high school students could graduate early. But they were graduating at the end of January, and they could not go to the community college. They could not go to the 4-year. That's still pretty much the case now.
It does put them at a disadvantage because they're not, it doesn't match up with the traditional community college or college calendars.
And it's safe to say there are more and more high school students who are graduating early that are caught in a little.
To Madam Chair's point of doing it at the high school, how would that affect us with transportation? I know a lot of our buses run dual routes, and we pick up one school and then go back and pick up another school. So if we had on different calendar days.
We would have to go back and take a look at it, but you're right. We have dual routes for most buses for high schools and middle schools. So what would happen is we would actually be running transportation more days than what we would with the regular schedule that we have right now. So, but we could, that's something we would just have to adapt to and adjust to, but.
Well, on the dual routes, it shouldn't make any difference. We do that all the time,
Right.
every day. It would be.
The only,
They wouldn't overlap, the days wouldn't overlap.
right, the only difference is if we have, different days for high school, then we would actually run buses for the high school for that specific day and stuff, so it would extend out some of the schedule for the high school and also school nutrition.
Yeah, well, the days would be shorter for the high school.
But I want you to know, and I'm very concerned about this, and I know we're bound by the beginning and the end date, but as a former geometry and an algebra teacher, and I'm gonna have to get all that taught now in 79 or 80 days. We're talking about possibly almost a month. So I know what we're trying to do, because I always wanted my exams before Christmas. And I can tell you, students scored better when we did it that way. But when you start cutting those classes by 20 days, understand, you can't cover all of them.
Now,
You
one thing,
can't do it. And
yeah, one way to address that, Mr. Wiggins, we definitely would need to have some discussion with our high school principals about scheduling.
Yes.
What are you scheduling second semester versus what are you scheduling first semester? And if we went to a model that was maybe an 80 and 100 day, definitely looking at what you're scheduling second semester. And that's going to take some education for our high school principals and look at what we need to do there and how that would go through, and working again with instructional services to make sure they look at and think about all those factors.
Thank you, and I would definitely want us to do that.
Yep.
If I may I share? I think, Mr. Wiggins, from an instructional side, while I certainly do support our students having the exams before Christmas like you or before the holidays, I do share concerns about the amount of days, because there are some content areas that students, even with a longer period of time, can't absorb as quickly. They need the number of time. Right. And having been a proponent of always wanting additional educational time for students versus decreasing the number of days for students. And I do worry about AP exams, that some AP courses that students take in the spring and in the fall, so the discrepancies that could cause. Another concern is a retired superintendent friend of mine had a recent conversation with a legislator who had some concern about school districts not making up inclement weather days, and said, oh, if schools can meet their hours and fewer, one of the ways that we could give teachers a raise is to decrease the number of days on a teacher's contract, and that would be considered a raise. So if we reduce the number of days by 3 days, give that as a raise, that's a raise to teachers, and they're working fewer days, and we don't have to come up with more money. So I just politically think if we do this and they see 25 work days, we just need to be aware of what message that may send as well.
Exactly. What kind of message are we sending them?
Is anybody actually doing this school year, or is it all set for?
It'll all be for next year.
Chatham County actually did it this year. I had a meeting with superintendents, and Chatham County actually had their exams before Christmas.
Barry, you or Brent may know this, so, and hopefully if you don't, we'll find out. I understand that a couple of mountain counties are using online services to provide makeup time for missed days. In some of your meetings, when you have those people in there, I'd be interested to know how effective is it? Because if it's effective, that may be, if we ever get in a time that we have to make up 2 weeks of school, which we have years ago, that might be something we want to consider, but I'd be interested in that.
I know the legislation talks about school districts who typically within a 10-year period have so many days that they're out. We don't actually fall into that category most of the time, but some of those western counties do because of all the snow that they get. And so they have a little bit more flexibility. But when I was in Jones County, we had Floyd, for example, and we had schools that were out 10 to 15 days. There was actually waivers that we requested, and we were able to waive some of those days. We had to make some up, but some of them were waived. So under extenuating circumstances and it's an emergency, there is a way around that legislation, but
I don't think it's the best instructional
it's-
practice to follow.
it's
but-
not, it wouldn't be to say,
Right.
all right, we have an inclement weather day, then, oh, we're not gonna make up that time, you guys just work at home on your computer. I don't
Yeah.
think we need to start going down that.
I just
that
wondered how effective it's been for them.
I think this discussion is good, and we certainly don't promote the Cumberland County, and this is discussion. But I did get a email that I think is a positive for us in looking at Dr. Gardner now, Brandon Gardner. He's been working with the North Carolina Military Affairs Commission, been keeping an eye on that. And on Thursday, the state superintendent met, and I'll just read you what he says here. It says the state superintendent said he was making the following proposal. And I think this would affect us in looking at the calendar. Increase support and flexibility for the areas of the most military-connected students. And that would be Cumberland and Onslow. It would add one additional regional military family counselor. But then it also goes on to say that they support school calendar flexibility in the LEAs with the highest military-connected populations to allow semester exams to occur in December before families move. And then it goes on to talk about that this was also brought up along with Harry Brown's proposal that military families be allowed to pre-enroll starting dates or starting times. So I think if that goes into a package deal and Cumberland and Onslow receive some kind of flexibility on the start date, then that solves our problem. If we can get, 10 days earlier than August 26th, then we can build a calendar with 180 days, 90, and this would eliminate us having to go any further with trying to come up with alternatives around the legislation.
So we need to talk to Bob Dickerson. He's on that committee.
Right.
May I, Barry, let me add to that. You brought up a great point which passes us sometimes. Understand, military families who are moving and leaving over the holidays, and they're not coming back. And what an imposition we have put on those families for the husband to go on and then the wife and the children to follow later, because we have some end-of-course tests. And we had to work that out. How do they take the end-of-course test when they're already in California or Texas?
Well, we do have
And
I'm sorry, Paul, I mean to
And how do
interrupt.
we have flexibility to give it a little bit early? Well, that's
I do
a real
think,
imposition on the military families.
I think this too, but we do have the flexibility to give locally developed tests early. It has, would you know that we can.
Early ones, but the state ones,
Yeah.
the end-of-course test.
Good discussion.
Thank you.
Bob, if you're going to military affairs tonight, you might, and see Bob Dickerson, you may want to mention that to him.
I will.
I know that we haven't had a break, but if y'all will let us hang for 5 minutes, Paul, or do you need to take a break?
It's hot in
It is.
I can fix that.
Unless you really need a break right now.
It might be I'm sitting between Bob and
Let's
Alex.
go ahead. Well, we're talking about synergistic next, so this is appropriate, I think. But as soon as we finish this, we'll take a quick break and move into closed session if you will allow us to do that. Steve, I asked Steve earlier about looking into giving us a report on the synergistic energy program. And we're planning to do a large presentation in a public meeting in August. But he's going to kind of just give an overview of cost savings and what it's done for us. So, Steve?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Just a quick synopsis of the synergistic program that we have in place right now. In January 2016, we entered into an agreement, 5-year agreement for energy management program. This is an energy behavior management program. So we're not looking at replacing all the lights to LEDs. That's not the program that we're talking about. This is where we're actually looking at how we're using the energy on campuses and how we can train ourselves to use energy more efficiently. The agreement said that any savings that was derived from this energy management program, half of it would come to us and half of it would go to Synergistics. We didn't have to provide any additional funding to Synergistics except for half of the cost savings. We call that cost avoidance here. So in that process, what we did was we created a baseline energy cost in 2016, and we started monitoring it. And when we saw energy savings, at that point in time, we received half and they received half. What we did with what Synergistic provided in this process was 2 energy specialists on campus in our district full-time. Their full-time for their energy specialist isn't our full-time Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 or 8 to 4. What they do is they're on our sites 7 days a week, 24 hours a day at different times. They're going out and auditing the schools and making sure that we have the lights turned off, we have doors closed, we have the temperature set accordingly. So they're out there not just during Monday through Friday. What they're out there doing is they're looking at seeing if we're maintaining our energy programs in place 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. The reason why that's important is because, as you know, we don't want to have classroom environments that aren't comfortable for the students and the staff. And so the primary goal for us is to make sure our students and staff are still comfortable, but also manage the energy as efficiently as possible. One of the things that we do with our savings is, part of our savings is, it goes back into the energy savings programs we have. For example, when we purchased LED lights for the auditoriums, well, this comes out of our energy savings program, so that way we can see continuing savings, and it cascades down. It's a snowball effect. The more we spend in energy savings, the more we save. One of the things we also do is, if you've noticed over the last couple of years, we haven't really increased any of our energy utility costs for the last couple of years. The reason why is because even though we see an increase of 5% or 6%, sometimes 10% a year, we've been able to absorb it in the costs that we've already had in place. So we're actually saving money with the Synergistic program, and that's some of the things we want to let you know of. In August of this year, we'll have a full-blown presentation, and in that presentation, they'll go through the program again, and we'll also talk about the cost savings. But just for a quick snapshot, in 2016-17, we saved about $823,000 overall. So half of that went to Synergistics and half of it went to us. And remember, when Synergistics used this, the money that we provided Synergistics, they provided 2 energy specialists full-time. And also what they've done too is they've provided a suite of engineers, different engineers for different systems, because we're not just talking about electricity, we're talking about water, we're talking about gas, we're talking about all the utility savings that we can, sewer included. And so they provide a suite of engineers that actually help us out too. So if we have a problem on a campus saying, well, we don't know if we got these VAV controllers set quite right or something's not working right, they'll actually work with us as well with trained engineers to help us adjust the settings as much as possible. So that's basically what we're looking at right there. If there's any questions?
Questions for Steve?
Does fuel for our buses fall under this program?
No. Now,
I'm
fuel
looking
for-
forward to the presentation.
But Mr. Merritt, fuel for heating oil?
No,
Yes.
fuel for heating oil, but not for the buses.
Right. And it's basically the same thing, but
Any other questions? Thank you, Steve.
thank you.
Now, may I have a motion to go into closed session pursuant to the Open Meetings Law
So moved.
143-318 for the purpose of considering the qualifications, competence, and performance of an employee or employers.
You got a motion in a second.
And for the purpose of considering and establishing the board's negotiating position for the purchase of a new school site. I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, and you may take a quick break. I had to get that in because it's not just one thing that we're doing in there. I have a motion to come back into session.
Second.
A second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, and thank you. We had a to discussion in closed session, and for the purposes of the public to know that we did enter into discussion concerning personnel. And so that's all we need to say about that. But we also had a proposal given to us on property, and I'd like for maybe Alec or Steve to speak to that, and then we'll vote very quickly.
All right, the properties, there were two properties discussed. One was the property known as the Willis donation, and there's an agreement that had been prepared and agreed to by Mr. Willis to donate a certain piece of property to the school system with some conditions to be taken care of by the board, construction of a road. At any rate, Mr. Willis has agreed to the terms in the agreement for donation of real property for a school site, and it would be before the board today or at their pleasure to vote to accept the donation of the property.
Just to let everyone be aware that this is contingent on, we will sign, if we agree today to sign this agreement, that it's contingent on funding, which comes from our commissioners, and we've had talks with them, so that would, not any funding for the land donation, but for the school when we decide to build it. May I have a motion to accept the negotiated contract?
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions or comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. At least that's one property we've looked at and are kind of satisfied with, and then we will be looking at another property ASAP to move forward with our building plan. If there's nothing else on the agenda and nothing from, oh, that's right. Excuse me, my fault. We did discuss a personnel issue, and I would like now for us to vote to decide if we agree with the action that we took in closed session. So all in favor of that action, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Sorry, Bob. I told Bob we'd be out.